As we look at these stories from Genesis, as we look at the stories of these people God has chosen to be His people, these people that God has blessed, that God made all these promises to, we soon discover that these people are not exactly perfect. And this is not exactly the perfect family. I mean, just in those 4 verses that I read this morning, we got a spoiled brat, we got a tattletale, we got parents playing favorites, we got a husband who's got, mentions 2 of them here, but he's got 4 wives total. Yeah. You know any families like that? That can't get along? Siblings that can't talk to each other, parents that pick out a favorite child, somebody who thinks they're the favorite child? Yeah, we can all relate to that. Maybe not our family, but we know someone. I mean, yeah, our family's certainly not like that, but yeah. Right. And that's just in these few verses here at the beginning of chapter 37. As we go on through this chapter, we find out that things get a whole lot worse. As bad as what it is in these verses, that's just scratching the surface. Go down to verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And we know about this dream of Joseph, right? He's out shocking wheat, and all of his brothers' sheaves come and bow down to him. And Joseph tells all his brothers that. Keep in mind, Joseph is the youngest child at this time. He's the 11th son. All of his brothers are older than him, bigger than him. And he says, yeah, you guys are all going to come bow down to me someday. And it's not that they don't like him for saying that. They hated him all the more. They already hated him. He already knew what they thought of him, and he's telling them stuff like this. Then we get down to verse 9. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Okay, didn't you learn anything from the first time, Joseph? Your brothers don't want to hear these kind of things from you. But yeah, here, I had another dream, and again, all you guys are bowing down to me. And this one goes even farther because his parents also bow down to him. So Joseph, being his father's favorite son, goes and tells his dad, hey, let me tell you about this dream I had last night. Keep in mind, this is Israel. This is the guy that God often came and talked to. This is a guy who had many dreams in which God gave him a message. And if anybody's going to believe this is a dream from God, it's got to be Israel, right? His father. In verse 10 we read, his father rebuked him. Israel basically said to Joseph, you pipsqueak, I ain't never going to bow down to you. I'm in charge. I'm the dad. You're the one who needs to be respecting me, who needs to be bowing down to me, who needs to be worshiping me. I don't care if you do think this was from God. Not even his father appreciates his dreams. And then as we continue through this chapter, it gets even worse. We have this great story where, and I don't know what Israel was thinking. He says, well, Joseph, go out there and check on your brothers again and see what they're doing. Really? These brothers hate you, Joseph. They don't want anything to do with you because you already told your dad what they were doing and what they weren't supposed to be doing. And now you're going to send them out to spy on them again to hopefully get another report of what they're doing that they shouldn't be doing. What was Israel thinking, sending Joseph out there? And yeah, pretty much what we expect to happen does happen. The brothers say, yeah, here comes that dreamer. He thinks we're going to bow down to him. Well, let's show him. So they take him, and they grab him, and they throw him into a cistern. And the ironic thing is that when they put Joseph in that cistern, that actually made Joseph's dream come true. Because in order to see Joseph when he was in the cistern, they had to bow down and look at him. Not exactly the way Joseph pictured it, but no, okay. So yeah, he's in the cistern. What do we do with him? Do we just kill him? Do we leave him there? What do we do with him? How are we going to get rid of him? Oh, look, here comes a caravan. They're heading to Egypt. Let's sell him into slavery. That'll teach that boy. That'll show who's gonna be in charge. When you're a slave, there's nobody bowing down to you. So they sell them into slavery. And then, oh yeah, what are we gonna tell Dad? Because Dad's gonna know that Joseph came out there looking for us. And, well, let's take his coat and put a little blood on it. And take it to Dad and say, oh, that's all we found. We don't know what happened to him. We found his coat here, but couldn't find hide nor hair of him. Quite a family, isn't it? We would never be that bad, would we? We'd never throw anyone in a cistern. We'd never sell anyone into slavery. We'd never lie about what we did to somebody. Oh, no, let's not go there. See, there's one basic problem throughout this family, throughout this whole chapter. One problem, and it's even defined for us in verse 11. His brothers were jealous of him. Yeah, jealousy. We all know what that means, right? We want something that somebody else has got. And we want it bad enough to do whatever we have to do to get it. We don't like it that they have what they have because that's what we wanted. It was a problem back in Genesis. It's a problem a few hundred years later when God finally gets his children out of Egypt and he's taken them through the wilderness and he gives them the law. Remember the 10th commandment? You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or his donkey, or let's just make this simple. You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. It was a problem for Joseph. It was a problem for the Israelites in the wilderness. 6,000 years later, is it still a problem? Do we still deal with jealousy? Do we still deal with coveting, with wanting something that somebody else has got? You know, we look at this story, we find jealousy all over the place. The early church, a few hundred years after the resurrection, decided to come up with a list of 7 deadly sins. Yeah, guess what made the list? Jealousy. Envy. One of the worst things that we can do. So today, as we look at jealousy, I'm going to share with you a couple causes of jealousy. A couple reasons why we are jealous. And then 3 ways to overcome jealousy. 3 things that we can do instead of being jealous. The first cause of jealousy is quite simply insecurity. We don't feel good about ourselves. We think somebody's better than us. And we don't have to go any farther than the wives of Israel to see this. Imagine being Leah. Finally gets married. The next day, her husband says, I want another wife. I want a younger wife. I want a more beautiful wife. You're not the wife I want this wife. What do you suppose Leah's self-confidence was at that point in time? How secure was she in who she was? Being told that after 1 day of marriage. But it's interesting that several years later, things have changed. The tables have turned. See, wives in that society had basically one main purpose. And that was to have sons. So several years later, Leah's got 4 sons. Rachel has none. Now who's insecure? Now who's jealous? As we read in Genesis 30, verse 1. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. She was the beautiful one. She was the most loved one. She was the one that Israel wanted. But yet she didn't have any children. She didn't have any sons. And because of that, her life, she felt, was not worth living. So she says, I got to fix this problem. Okay, Jacob, take my maid, sleep with her. Maybe she'll have a child. Then I can have that as my child. Because it worked so well for Grandma Sarah. Remember that story? Sarah and Hagar? Yeah, there were no problems with that whatsoever. So, sure enough, Jacob and Israel sleeps with her maid. She becomes pregnant, has a son. Suppose that made Rachel feel any better? Suppose that helped any? Or was it just another blow that, yeah, even your maid can do what you can't do? Have a son. How often do we do that when we're jealous? We think we have to have something so bad that we're going to do some irrational things in order to get it. And then afterwards we find out, that didn't help any anyway. That didn't work out the way we thought it was going to work out. You know, when we compare ourselves to others, it's not helpful. Because we are going to feel insecure. We are going to see where other people are better than ours, better than us. So yeah, why do we do that? Insecurity, one of the major causes of jealousy. The second major cause is simply a lack of faith. Look at these sons of Israel. And go back to what God promised their great-grandfather, Abraham, in Genesis 22, verse 17. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. God is telling these people they're going to be given cities of their enemies. God's just going to work all this out for them. They're going to be important. They're going to be in positions of authority. They're going to have all this stuff. But they kind of seem to forget about that. If we go to Revelation 21, this vision of John where he sees this new heaven coming down out of the clouds. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12 sons of Israel's names are going to be on the gates of heaven. But yet that wasn't enough for them. Look at Jesus. The Son of God comes from the line of Judah. Not Joseph. Judah. God promised he was going to take care of these guys. God promised he was going to bless them. God promised he was going to make them important. And they said, I want it now. I don't want to wait on you, God. I want what I want now, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get it right now. They didn't trust God. They didn't have any faith in God to do what God had promised to do for them. Insecurity and a lack of faith. Why we become jealous. So jealousy is a problem. How do we deal with it? What do we have to do in order to overcome jealousy? The first thing is take responsibility for our attitudes. You know, this may come as a shock to some of you, but there's always going to be someone better than you. I don't care who you are. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how fast you can run. I don't care how big of a house you got. I don't care how much money you got in your bank account. There's somebody bigger and better and stronger and richer than you. That's just the reality of life. We all know that. We all have to deal with that. But how do we deal with it? What do we do when we discover someone better than us? More powerful, richer, more famous? What is our attitude towards that person? Peter has an interesting comment about that in 1 Peter chapter 2, the first verse. Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice, which is a desire to do harm, and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. When we discover that person better than us, how many of us feel like that? We want to hurt them. We want to tell lies about them. We want to be nice to their face, but tear them down behind their back. We're envious of them. We want to slander them. Or do we do what Peter tells us to do? Rid yourselves of all those feelings. The reality is we're going to have those feelings because we're humans, and as humans we have feelings like that. But what do you do with them? Do you allow them feelings to control your life? Or do you get rid of them? Do you say, God, I'm done with this, I don't want to think like that anymore. Help me feel love towards that person. The second way to overcome jealousy is to find fulfillment in Christ. Really, jealousy is a desire to find fulfillment in stuff, in things, in possessions, in positions, in authority, and whatever. And how often does that bring us fulfillment? We need to consider what God said to the Israelites back in Deuteronomy 31, verse 6, just before they went into the promised land. The Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. So yeah, we can spend our whole life looking for fulfillment through things, through power, through authority. Or we can look at this and say, you know what? God is with me. God is always going to be with me. God is never going to leave me. God's never going to forsake me. And when we realize that, and when we accept that, and when we embrace that, then we don't have to worry about all this other stuff. It's not going to make us happy anyway. What more do we need besides knowledge of the fact that God is with us once we are a child of God? The third way to overcome jealousy, embrace our purpose. Back to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. But you are a chosen people. You have been chosen. A royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession. God has chosen you. You are special in God's eyes. God is glad that you're a part of his kingdom. And what's our purpose? That you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Quite simply, when we become children of God, our purpose is to praise God. Our purpose is to tell others what God did for us. Our purpose is not to have a bigger house or have a faster boat or to have more money than anybody else. No. When we realize this is our purpose in life, we realize we have been chosen by God, then we don't need to be jealous of anybody else. It sounds simple, but there's one problem. We live in a society that teaches us to say we're number one. I don't care if we're talking about sports teams, or we're talking about personal accomplishments, or we're talking about family, or we're talking about your job. We are told continually to make sure that you are number one. And there's nothing wrong with working to better yourself, to improve yourself, but what happens when we continually try to be number one? How do we get to be number one? How many times do we push someone else down so we can be number one? How many times do we belittle others? Do we slander them? Do we mistreat them? Do we take advantage of them just so we can be number one? And how many times do we end out like Joseph and wonder why nobody likes us? Who wants to be around a person who's going to mistreat others all the time just so they can be number one? What do we gain by striving to be number one? Besides more problems, more issues, more difficulties in our life. What's so important about being number one? Then I looked at this thing and I thought, you know what? This is right. We are number one. Notice it doesn't say I am number one. It says we are number one. And as children of God, we are number one in God's eyes. We're all equal in God's eyes. We're all important to God. We all have been blessed by God exactly the same. Yeah, we are number one in God's eyes. So my advice to you this morning is quite simple. Quit trying to be better than everybody else. And realize that you already are the best you can be. Please join me in prayer. Oh God, as we come into your presence this morning, we confess that quite often we deal with feelings of jealousy, with feelings of envy, with feelings of trying to be better than someone else. Help us, oh God, to realize that we are number one in your eyes, that is our main purpose in life. And help us to rejoice in the fact that we don't need to try to be better than others. And this I pray in your name. Amen.